locked and loaded. At 3 a.m., while the world was fast asleep, a single message directed at Iran sent shockwaves to the very foundations of the global order. But was this just a military threat, or a bitter admission that the old rules are officially dead? From the streets of Tehran to the oil fields of Venezuela, we're being forced into the trough between two waves, a state that is no longer peace, but not quite war. Stop looking at the politics and start looking at the systemic collapse. I need you to understand this context because this is the first visible fracture in a dam that's about to burst. But why Greenland, and why now? To most of the world, this sounded like a bizarre real estate proposal, a provocative headline that flashed across the screen and then vanished into the noise of the 24-hour news cycle. But if you look beneath the surface, you begin to see something far more significant. This wasn't about land. It was about a total loss of strategic trust. It was the first visible crack in a shield that has protected the West for over 70 years. I need you to look at the context President Trump provided. He wasn't talking about a vacation spot. He was talking about national security. He noted that Greenland is currently being surrounded. Russian ships and Chinese vessels are moving through those waters with increasing frequency. He argued that Denmark simply does not have the capacity to secure it. And if the United States doesn't move in, America's greatest rivals will. But it's the language that followed that truly sent chills through the halls of power. When the Danish government flatly refused the proposal, the rhetoric didn't de-escalate, it doubled down. Trump stated, "We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not." And when he was asked how far he would go, what methods he would use to secure this territory, he gave a three-word answer that left no room for comfort. He simply said, "You'll find out." What does "you'll find out" mean in the world of high-stakes diplomacy? It's not a policy statement. It's not a point of negotiation. It is total ambiguity. It leaves military action, economic coercion, and diplomatic isolation all on the table. It's the kind of language that makes enemies calculate and allies tremble. But here is what most people missed. The shock didn't stop with words. Within days, the United States took action that no one expected. And this is where the betrayal becomes concrete. The administration announced massive tariffs. But they weren't aimed at Russia. They weren't aimed at China or Iran. They were directed at 8 of America's closest European allies: Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland. All of them NATO members. All of them nations that have stood shoulder to shoulder with the United States since the end of the Second World War. Think about that for a moment. These are economic weapons that, until this moment, were reserved only for adversaries. Suddenly they were being deployed against friends. Why is this significant? Because it signals a fundamental fracture in the Western alliance. For 3/4 of a century, the bond between these nations was considered the foundation of global stability. It was the iron of the modern world. And now that iron is striking iron. The reaction from Europe was immediate and unprecedented. We saw emergency meetings convened in Brussels within hours. We heard condemnations from the European Union that sounded like they were directed at a hostile power, not a partner. Stock markets didn't just dip. They plummeted as investors began to process the reality of a transatlantic trade war. But the most sobering development happened on the ground. Within days of the tariff announcement, several European nations began deploying military personnel to Greenland. These were small contingents, largely symbolic, but the message was unmistakable. They weren't deploying to stop Russia. They weren't deploying to stop China. They were deploying to signal military resistance against the influence of the United States. Let that sink in. Allied nations, for the first time in modern history, were moving troops to signal a standoff with their own protector. This isn't the Cold War. This isn't a conflict with a foreign regime. This is the inside of the house catching fire. This is what it looks like when strategic trust evaporates in real time. But why is the world reacting so violently to this specific moment? Why did a comment about Greenland trigger a military and economic fracture of this scale? The answer isn't about the territory itself, it's about the pattern. It's about the realization that the old alliances are no longer a guarantee of safety. This brings us back to a deeper truth found in the ancient texts. In the book of Daniel, the final kingdom of man is described as having feet of iron mixed with clay. Iron is strong. Iron is military might, but it is mixed with something that does not bond. Clay. It represents the fragile political will and the divided interests of the nations. When you see iron refusing to connect with iron, when you see the strongest military alliance in history cracking under the weight of tariffs and territorial disputes, you are watching that ancient prophecy manifest in the headlines. The truest sign of the times isn't just the rise of enemies in the East. It is the disintegration of the shield in the West. The old world order isn't just being challenged from the outside, it is being discarded from within. We are entering a phase where the iron no longer holds. And as this shield continues to crumble, it leaves a vacuum that the prophets warned would eventually be filled by something far more dangerous. The question you have to ask yourself is this: if the alliances we've trusted for 70 years can vanish in a single week of tariffs and threats, what else that we consider stable is actually on the verge of collapse? This isn't just politics. This is the beginning of a structural failure that will redefine every boundary we know. Why do we treat economic sanctions as a simple tool of diplomacy? In our modern world, we've been taught to see them as a peaceful alternative to war, a way to pressure bad actors without firing a shot. But I need you to understand something fundamental. In a globalized world, money isn't just paper. It is the lifeblood of the entire human architecture. It is the blood that flows through the veins of every city, every market, and every home. And when you weaponize that lifeblood, you aren't just performing a surgical strike. You are poisoning the well for everyone. Think about the mechanism here. When the United States cuts a nation off from the global banking system, like we see with the SWIFT network, it uses the dollar as a blade. But here is the problem with using your own currency as a weapon. Currency only works if people trust it. Trust is the only thing that gives that paper value. Every time a nation is excluded, every time a bank account is frozen, the rest of the world watches. They see that the shield they thought protected their wealth is actually a guillotine waiting to drop. This leads to a phenomenon I call structural fatigue. The very system designed to facilitate trade is now being used to destroy it. And as the user of the weapon, your own hand begins to bleed. This isn't just about punishing Iran or liberating Venezuela. This is about the weaponization of prosperity itself. This brings us to a blueprint laid out thousands of years ago in the book of Revelation, chapter 18. Most people read about the fall of Babylon and imagine fire from the sky or an invading army. But I want you to look closer at the text. The primary lament in Revelation 18 doesn't come from generals or soldiers. It comes from the merchants of the earth. Why are they weeping? The Bible says it's because no man buyeth their merchandise anymore. The text lists the specific cargo: gold, silver, precious stones, pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet. It mentions wood, brass, iron, and marble. It even lists the commodities: cinnamon, odors, ointments, frankincense, wine, and oil. This is a description of a total systemic collapse of global commerce. It is the death of a market. It is the moment the lifeblood stops flowing. You see, Babylon in the prophetic sense isn't just a place on a map. It is a system of weaponized prosperity. It is a world where wealth is used to control souls and buy allegiances. And the Bible warns that this system will reach a breaking point. We are seeing that breaking point manifest right now in nations like Iran and Venezuela. We've been told these are isolated cases, that we are simply punishing rogue regimes for their actions. But what if these nations are actually the first visible cracks in the Babylon blueprint? Look at the pressure on Iran's currency. We've seen the rial lose 40% of its value in a matter of months. Look at the hyperinflation in Venezuela, where basic goods became a luxury. These aren't just political failures. They are evidence of what happens when a debt-based system is pushed to its absolute limit. The entire global economy is currently built on a foundation of promises that cannot be kept. It is a house of cards held together by the threat of exclusion. But here is the catch. When you exclude too many players, the game itself stops working. The merchants begin to realize that the coins in their pockets are only worth something as long as the system allows them to be. This is the shift in understanding I need you to make. We aren't just witnessing a punishment phase. We are witnessing the suicide phase of the modern financial order. By using the dollar to crush Iran and squeeze Venezuela, the system is forcing the world to find a way out. Nations are already moving. They are creating alternative payment systems. They are stockpiling gold. They are distancing themselves from the center of the web. They are preparing for a world where the Babylon blueprint no longer functions. This is the fatigue that precedes the collapse. In Revelation 18, the fall of the system happens in 1 hour. It is sudden. It is absolute. It is a total paralysis of the trade that the world depended on. When you see the global payment systems becoming a battlefield, you aren't just looking at news. You are looking at the infrastructure of Babylon being dismantled by its own weight. The merchants will weep, not because of a bomb, but because the trust that held the world together has finally vanished. The crisis in Iran and Venezuela isn't the end of the story. It's the stress test for the entire world. It shows us that when prosperity is weaponized, the system itself becomes the victim. And as we see these merchants begin to tremble, we have to ask, how much longer can a house stand when it has begun to consume its own foundation? This is the reality of the Babylon blueprint. It is a system that promises everything, but in the end, it leaves the world with nothing but cargo that no one can buy. I've seen the questions in the comments. Where is Venezuela in the Bible? Why should we care about a country in South America when the heart of prophecy is Jerusalem? It's a fair question, but it's based on a misunderstanding of how prophecy actually works. Prophecy isn't just a list of modern names on a map. It's a blueprint of logistics. It's a map of how resources must align before the final curtain rises. Think back to the ancient world. When the prophets spoke of Egypt or Tarshish, they weren't just naming neighbors. They were identifying the giants of trade and the providers of wheat and silver. They were pointing to the pillars of the global economy at that time. Today, the world runs on a different currency. It runs on oil. And that brings us directly to the Western Hemisphere and a nation that most prophecy students completely overlook. Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves on the entire planet, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia. In a world that still runs on energy, that makes Venezuela the most strategic piece of real estate outside of the Middle East. But here's the part most people miss. Why has the regime in Caracas spent the last decade building a direct, high-level bridge to Tehran? Why would a nation thousands of miles away from Persia link its fate so closely to the Islamic Republic? This isn't just a political friendship. It is what I call survival compensation. I need you to understand the nature of this connection. Iran, ancient Persia, is under crippling international pressure. Its economy is in freefall. It needs cash, it needs gold, and it needs a foothold in the West to bypass sanctions. On the other side, Venezuela needs military technology. It needs the drones, the missiles, and the tactical expertise that the IRGC has spent decades perfecting. This creates a survival bridge that defies geography. Within the last few years, we have witnessed an unprecedented air and sea corridor between these two nations. We've seen the Mahan air flights. We've seen the Iranian tankers moving oil and chemicals across the Atlantic in exchange for bars of Venezuelan gold. This isn't just trade. This is the formation of a resource axis that connects directly to the coalition described in Ezekiel 38. But how does Venezuela fit into a Middle Eastern war? Think of Venezuela as the shadow refueling station for the upcoming theater of conflict. Ezekiel 38 describes a massive military movement, a coalition of nations moving against Israel from the extreme north. A military move of that scale requires a staggering amount of logistical support. It needs fuel, it needs energy, it needs a constant supply chain that can withstand Western pressure. The shadow refueling station provides exactly that. By securing a partnership with Venezuela, the enemies of Israel are securing the energy required to sustain a long-term war machine. This is the convergence of the unnamed. Just because a nation's modern name isn't written on a piece of ancient parchment doesn't mean it's absent from the plan. Prophecy doesn't start with the invasion. It starts with the positioning. It starts with the gathering of resources. It starts with the alignment of the refuelers who will provide the power for the players explicitly named in the text. I want you to see the pattern here. The Bible focuses on Israel as the epicenter, but it also reveals that nations far from her borders still affect her fate. In Revelation 18, we see a global system of commerce that involves every merchant of the earth. In Ezekiel, we see alliances that require global logistics. When a nation thousands of miles away begins to provide the lifeblood that sustains Israel's enemies, that nation has effectively entered the prophetic theater. This is why the current pressure on Venezuela is so significant. Every sanction on the Caracas regime is a strike against the supply line of the Persian state. Every move to isolate Venezuela is a move to disconnect the refueling station from the war machine. The world looks at this and sees oil prices or regional politics, but we must look through the lens of Scripture and see the infrastructure of a future coalition being dismantled or reinforced. Prophecy is the convergence of necessary resources. We are watching the oil of the West begin to flow into the war machine of the East. We are watching an axis form that ignores oceans and continents. When the resources of the unnamed begin to fuel the ambitions of the explicitly named, you know the contractions are getting closer together. Venezuela is the logistical backbone for a coalition that is already moving into place. It is the proof that the stage is being set on every continent simultaneously. The refuelers are taking their positions. The supply lines are being drawn in gold and oil. The question is, are you watching the news or are you watching the pattern? Because once you see the shadow refueling station, you realize that the battle for Jerusalem involves the entire face of the earth. We've been told the Middle East is finally entering an era of peace. The headlines call it a historic realignment. We see the handshakes, the signing ceremonies on the White House lawn, and the talk of a new, prosperous future for the children of Abraham. But I want you to look closer at the foundation of these agreements. If a house is built only because the neighbors are terrified of a common predator, do you call that a home? Or do you call it a temporary fortification? This brings us directly to a vision recorded over 2,000 years ago in the second chapter of Daniel, the great statue. Most people focus on the head of gold or the chest of silver, representing the empires of history. But I need you to look at the feet, the very part that supports the entire weight of the final world system. Daniel says the feet were made of iron mixed with miry clay. I need you to understand the nature of these materials. Iron is hard. Iron is military strength. Iron is the raw, unyielding power of the nation-state. But then there is the clay. In the original text, this is miry clay. It's soft, it's brittle, and most importantly, it does not bond with iron. You can press them together, you can force them into the same mold, but they will never truly become one. This is the perfect description of the modern peace we are seeing today. Look at the Abraham Accords. You have Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. On the surface, it looks like a breakthrough, but look at the motivation. These nations aren't coming together because they share a common vision for the soul of the region. They are coming together because they share a common fear of the Persian state. They are iron and clay trying to fuse under the heat of a looming war. This leads to a fundamental question. Is this actually peace, or is it a brittle foundation? But here is the detail that most people are missing, and it connects directly to why the current moment feels so fragile. The prize in this entire structure is Saudi Arabia. As the guardian of Islam's two holiest sites, Mecca and Medina, Saudi Arabia is the leader of the Sunni world. Their recognition of Israel would transform the Middle East more than any other event in modern history. And we see the pieces moving. We've seen Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman meeting with Israeli officials in secret. We've seen the Saudi airspace open up to Israeli flights for the first time. We see the framework of a deal being constructed in real time. But as this final brick is being prepared, the structure isn't getting stronger. It's getting more brittle. Think about what happens when you add more clay to the iron. Saudi Arabia has its own internal sensitivities, its own religious guardianship to protect, and its own regional ambitions. By bringing more diverse nations into a single, multilateral framework, you aren't creating unity. You are creating a complex web of compromises that cannot sustain pressure. This is what Daniel warned about, a world system that looks imposing and powerful, but lacks the internal cohesion to survive a strike. Every new member of the Abraham Accords adds more iron in terms of military cooperation, but it also adds more clay in terms of political instability. They are confirming a regional covenant, but it is a covenant built on the shifting sands of shared anxiety. But why does this matter for us right now? It matters because this is the infrastructure required for the end-time scenario described in Daniel 9:27. The Bible says a leader will come who will confirm a covenant with many. Notice the language. It doesn't say he creates a peace treaty with Israel alone. It says he confirms a covenant with many, a multilateral regional framework that already exists. The Abraham Accords are not that covenant, but they are the table being set. They are the feet being formed. We are watching the world build a structure of regional cooperation that has no heart, no common bond, and no true unity. It is a volatile mix, a mixed number of competing interests that are only held together by a temporary threat. The world calls this peace and security, but the Bible calls it a snare. It is a setup for a moment when a single figure will step into this brittle architecture and promise to be the bond that finally makes the iron and clay stick together. When you see the strongest military powers in the region trying to force a bond with nations that were their enemies just a decade ago, don't look at it as a victory for diplomacy. Look at it as the manifestation of the feet of iron and clay. The structure is rising. The pieces are in place. But the foundation is already showing the stress of the weight it's being asked to carry. We are building a world of strategic compromises instead of lasting peace. And as this brittle foundation continues to grow, it prepares the way for the one who will promise to fix it all. The question isn't whether the deal with Saudi Arabia will happen. The question is, what happens to the world when the clay finally cracks? Why do we find it so easy to dismiss the headlines today? I've seen it in the comments and I hear it in the streets. There have always been wars. My grandfather heard the same rumors in 1914. My parents heard them during the Cold War. Why should now be any different? It is a compelling argument. It's an argument that allows us to go back to sleep. But here is the danger of relying on history to predict a moment that is designed to be unprecedented. Have you ever wondered why the world feels so indifferent to the brink of collapse? In psychology, there is a term for this: habituation. When your brain is exposed to a stimulus, like a crisis, over and over again at a steady intensity, it eventually stops reacting. It filters the signal out. It's a survival mechanism designed to keep us sane in a chaotic world. But when it comes to the signs of the times, this survival mechanism becomes a fatal blind spot. It turns into what I call toxic habituation. Think of our global order like a massive concrete dam. For 100 years, that dam has had small, hairline fractures. Water has been seeping through those cracks since the early 20th century. Most people look at those cracks and say, "It's been like that for decades. It's fine. The wall is still standing." But they are looking at the cracks, not the water level. They are ignoring the pressure per square inch on the other side of the concrete. But what happens when the reservoir behind the dam suddenly doubles in volume? The cracks that were stable for a century suddenly become catastrophic. The difference between 1914 and today isn't that we have rumors of wars. The difference is the concentration of pressure. We are seeing a convergence of crises that our grandfathers never had to process at the same time. Economic collapse, global pandemics, territorial rifts among allies, and nuclear threats, all happening in the same season, with the same intensity across the entire face of the earth. Why does the speed of these events matter so much? When Jesus described this pattern, he used the Greek word odin, meaning birth pangs. Any mother can tell you the pain of the first contraction is significant, but it's the frequency that tells you the birth is imminent. When the space between the contractions vanishes, you are no longer in the rumor phase. You are in the delivery phase. We are watching the space between world-altering events shrink from decades to years and from years to weeks. This is the compression of time that defines our generation. This leads us to the warning of the snare recorded in Luke 21. A snare only works if the animal is comfortable. If the animal thinks the forest is just as it has always been, it walks right into the trap. Our habituation, our belief that this has always happened, is the very thing that makes the snare effective. We have become so used to the sound of the alarm that we've forgotten what the alarm is for. The world is staying calm precisely because it has forgotten how to be vigilant. But look at the concrete facts. In 1914, information took weeks to travel by ship and telegram. In 1945, the world had years to rebuild its broken infrastructure. Today, a direct military threat posted at 3 a.m. can trigger a total currency collapse in Tehran by sunrise. A trade rift over a territory like Greenland can fracture a 70-year alliance in a single week. Our world is far more efficient today, which means it is also far more fragile. The pressure is no longer distributed across time. It is hitting every fault line simultaneously. This is what most people miss. They are waiting for a war that looks like the past, while ignoring a collapse that is happening in the present. The rumors have become a constant roar. The cracks in the dam are no longer seeping. They are spraying under the weight of a reservoir that is full to the brim. While the world stays asleep, comforted by the lie that it's always been this way, the pressure on the other side of the wall has reached the breaking point. But if the dam is about to break, what is the water that is filling it? And how is that pressure being channeled into our daily lives? This connects directly to the digital infrastructure we use every second of the day. It brings us to the most dangerous weapon ever created, not a bomb, but a noose made of information. This isn't just about what is happening out there in the world. It's about what is happening inside your own mind. We need to examine how the very thing you use to stay informed is being used to set the snare. Why do we think rumors of war are just words on a page or clips on a screen? In our modern era, we have been conditioned to believe that information is something we consume, something we can turn off whenever we choose. But I need you to understand that we have entered a phase where information has been transformed into a biological entity. It is no longer just a message. It is a digital noose, an infrastructure of control that is tightening around the collective consciousness of humanity. Think about the physical sensation you feel when a push notification flashes on your phone at 3 a.m. Your heart rate spikes, your cortisol levels rise, your pupils dilate. Before your conscious mind can even process the what of the message, your body has already reacted to the threat. This is not an accident. This is the global reflex network in action. We have built an artificial nervous system that connects billions of human brains to a single high-frequency signal of fear. In the ancient world, a rumor of war took weeks to travel by ship or horse. There was space for reflection. There was time for discernment. But today, the space between the rumor and the reflex has been reduced to milliseconds. When the most powerful man on earth posts a message about being locked and loaded, it doesn't just inform the public. It triggers a synchronized biological response across the entire planet. This is how the snare is set. The trap isn't hidden in the headlines. It is installed in your own neural pathways. This brings us to one of the most sobering warnings in all of Scripture, found in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. The Apostle Paul speaks of a time when God will send a strong delusion upon the earth. For generations, we have interpreted this to mean a single, massive lie, perhaps a false ideology or a deceptive leader. But what if the strong delusion is actually an environment? What if it is a total state of existence where the ability to distinguish truth from reaction has been systematically destroyed? The text says that people will believe the lie because they received not the love of the truth. This connects directly to the digital architecture we live in today. When we prioritize the speed of the notification over the depth of the truth, we are conditioning our souls to be deceived. We are trading our discernment for a dopamine hit of certainty. The strong delusion isn't just about being told a lie. It is about losing the capacity to stand outside the signal. It is about becoming part of a reflex network that can be steered by whoever controls the algorithm. I need you to see the digital noose for what it truly is. It is a system of collective hypnosis, a collective trance. When billions of people are reacting to the same stimulus at the same time, they cease to be individuals and start to function as a single, reactive mass. This is the perfect environment for a strong man to rise. Deception does not work on people who are calm, grounded, and silent. It only works on people who are shaken, desperate, and synchronized by fear. Every notification you receive is a test of your autonomy. Are you a subject of the truth, or are you a product of the reflex? The Bible warns that the snare will come on all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. This implies a level of synchronization that was impossible in any other generation. It describes a trap that is global in scale, but intimate in its application. It is a snare that catches you in your pocket, on your desk, and in your bed. But here is what most people miss about 2 Thessalonians 2. The delusion is sent to those who find pleasure in unrighteousness, meaning those who prefer the comfort of the reflex over the hard work of the truth. If we rely on the digital noose to tell us when to be afraid, we have already surrendered our sound mind. We have allowed the infrastructure of the world to dictate the state of our spirit. This is the neural snare. The trap is no longer being laid in the forest, it is being programmed into the software of our lives. When rumors of war can control the heart rate of a nation, that nation has already been conquered without a single shot being fired. They are no longer thinking, they are only reacting. And in that state of total reaction, they will accept any savior, any covenant, and any system that promises to make the noise stop. We have to ask ourselves, why are we so addicted to the very signal that is strangling our discernment? Why do we cleave to the shout and ignore the still small voice? The digital noose is tightening, and the only way to escape it is to step out of the reflex. We need a tactical shift in our soul. We need a way to reclaim our minds before the final contraction pulls the noose tight. This brings us to the only weapon that can cut through the infrastructure of deception. It is a weapon that the prophets used, and it is the only thing that can keep you standing when the global network finally crashes. It is the power of a sound mind. What if I told you that the most powerful weapon in your possession right now isn't something you can hold in your hand? In a world of nuclear threats, currency collapses, and fracturing alliances, we have been conditioned to look outward for our defense. We look to leaders, to policies, and to military might. But I need you to understand that the ultimate battlefield isn't in the Middle East or the oil fields of Venezuela. It is located exactly between your ears. We are living in an era of reflexive warfare. As we've examined, the digital noose is designed to bypass your logic and trigger your survival instincts. It wants you in a state of constant, low-level panic. Why? Because a person in panic is a person who can be steered. A person in fear is a person who will trade their soul for the promise of security. But there is a tactical countermeasure that the world cannot overcome. This brings us to one of the most essential strategic directives in the entire Bible. 2 Timothy 1:7. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, and of love, and of a sound mind. I want you to look closely at those three gifts: power, love, and a sound mind. In the original Greek, the term for sound mind is sophronismos. It doesn't just mean being calm. It refers to a mind that is self-disciplined, self-controlled, and most importantly, properly prioritized. It is a mind that has a neural firewall. Think of a sound mind as a tactical survival asset. When a notification flashes at 3 a.m. saying, "Locked and loaded," the spirit of fear wants your heart to race. It wants you to scroll, to worry, and to speculate. But the sound mind performs a scan. It asks, is this the strong delusion? Is this a rumor of war? Does this change the sovereignty of the Creator? If the answer is no, the sound mind refuses to engage the reflex. But why is not panicking considered a form of resistance? We've been told that being informed means being hyper-reactive to every headline. But in the kingdom of God, the most aggressive act of defiance you can commit against the strong delusion is to maintain your peace. If the entire global system runs on the fuel of your anxiety, then refusing to be anxious is an act of strategic sabotage. I need you to see that your peace is actually a weapon. When you refuse to join the reflex network, you break the synchronization of the snare. You become a glitch in the algorithm of deception. The world system expects you to be shaken when the iron and clay begin to separate. It expects you to despair when the Babylon blueprint begins to fail. But when you stand with a sound mind, you prove that your foundation is not built on the shifting sands of the world's economy or its alliances. But here is the hard truth that most people miss. You cannot control the world, but you are 100% responsible for your filter. We are currently being bombarded by a noose of information that is designed to choke out your discernment. If you allow the digital noose to be your primary source of reality, you will eventually be strangled by it. You have to decide right now what is allowed into your neural firewall. Are you feeding the spirit of fear with hours of speculation, or are you arming the sound mind with the eternal word? The sound mind is not a passive state. It is an active daily choice to disconnect from the reflex and reconnect with the truth. It is the decision to say, I see the rumors, I hear the shouts, but I will not surrender my autonomy to the algorithm. This is the tactical disconnect. It doesn't mean you are ignorant of the news. It means you are no longer a product of it. It means you can watch the nations align and the currencies fail without losing the sound mind that God has already given you. This is the only way to remain standing when the snare finally pulls tight on the rest of the world. The ultimate goal of the birth pang pattern isn't just to bring about the end, it is to test the quality of your filter. As the contractions get closer together, the noise will get louder. The threats will become more direct. The strong delusion will become more sophisticated. But remember, God did not give you fear. If you are feeling it, it didn't come from Him. It is an external signal trying to find a port in your mind. Close the port, engage the firewall, reclaim the sound mind that is your spiritual birthright. Because in the days to come, the person with the clearest mind will be the only one who can see the way out. Your peace is not just for your comfort. It is your primary defense against the deception that is coming upon the whole earth. Stand firm, stay disciplined, And never forget that the one who controls your filter is the one who controls your destiny. It's time to take back the ground that the digital noose has tried to steal. It's time to operate with the sound mind that defines the true believer. I've spent a lot of time reading through your comments lately. One person wrote something that stayed with me. They asked, "When will someone finally step in and fix this? Who is going to save the economy and bring back the world we used to know?" It's a natural question. We are conditioned to want a hero. We want a leader, a policy, or a miracle to patch the cracks in the dam and stop the water from rising. We want to believe that the world we've known for 70 years is just going through a rough patch, and that with the right positioning, everything can go back to normal. But I have to ask you a much more difficult question. Are you actually looking for a hero to fix a broken system, or are you prepared to face an unavoidable reality? We have spent this time examining the Babylon blueprint and the brittle foundations of our modern world. We've watched the iron of military might fail to bond with the clay of political interest. We've seen how the very systems we trusted for our prosperity have been weaponized into a digital noose designed to trigger our reflexes and choke out our discernment. These aren't just temporary political rifts or economic cycles. This is what it looks like when a global architecture reaches the point of structural failure. I need you to see that if you are waiting for someone to restore the world as it was 10 or 20 years ago, you are waiting for a ghost. The world is not breaking, it is being discarded. The snare isn't being set for our enemies. It is being set for a generation that has become too comfortable with the habituation of crisis. If you are still clinging to the dam, trying to hold up the concrete with your own hands, you are going to be swept away when the pressure finally becomes too much. So where does that leave us? True freedom, the kind that the world cannot give and the digital noose cannot take, does not come from finding a more stable currency or a more powerful military alliance. It doesn't come from a political victory or a territorial gain. It comes from the moment you decide to let go of your grip on the systems that are already in the process of dissolving. It is the realization that if the world as we know it has become a trap, then the only way to be safe is to stop being a part of it. This is the tactical disconnect we talked about. It's the decision to stop looking for a hero to fix the Babylon blueprint and to start operating with the sound mind that God has already provided. We have to stop asking the world to be stable when the Bible has already told us that everything that can be shaken will be shaken. The news will continue to roar. The rumors of war will become more frequent. The locked and loaded messages will keep flashing on your screen at 3 a.m. But you have a choice. You can stay in the reflex, frantically searching for a savior to patch the dam. Or you can step out of the trance, engage your neural firewall, and realize that the ruins of the old world are the only place where the truth can finally be seen clearly. Don't wait for a hero to fix a system that was designed to fail. The iron and the clay were never meant to hold forever. The merchants of the earth will weep for their cargo, but you don't have to weep with them. Your security isn't found in the stability of the global order. It is found in the sound mind that refuses to be snared by it. The dam is cracking. The contractions are closer than they've ever been. The question isn't whether the system will survive. It's whether you will be found standing on the ruins of a lie or standing firm on the foundation of the only truth that remains when everything else is gone. The midnight shout has already been heard. It's time to decide what you're really holding on to.